The debate in Washington is revealing just how extreme Republicans have become and how far they've drifted from their idol, Ronald Reagan. They think he's one of the greats. They think he belongs on Mount Rushmore. In fact, there's been a push for years to get him up there. They want Rushmore to look like this. But Republicans have a big problem. Reagan is too liberal for the day's GOP. Just take Social Security. Today, conservative columnist Charles Krauthammer attacked the president's tax plan, saying, quote, "Where are the spending cuts? Medicare, and now Obamacare and Social Security." He goes on to say, quote, "Democrats pretend that Social Security is covered through 2033 by its trust fund, except that trust fund is a fiction." Really? Here's what Mr. Reagan thought about all that.
Social Security has nothing to do with the deficit. Social Security is totally funded by the payroll tax levied on employer and employee. If you reduce the outgo of Social Security, that money would not go into the general fund to reduce a deficit. It would go into the Social Security Trust Fund. So Social Security has nothing to do with balancing a budget or erasing or lowering the deficit.
Social Security has nothing to do with the deficit. It's not President Obama saying that, it's President Reagan, their hero. And he also said this.
We're going to close the unproductive tax loopholes that have allowed some of the truly wealthy to avoid paying their fair share. In theory, some of those loopholes were understandable, but in practice, they sometimes made it possible for millionaires to pay nothing, while a bus driver was paying 10% of his salary, and that's crazy. Do you think the millionaire ought to pay more in taxes than the bus driver, or less?
A millionaire shouldn't pay less in taxes than a bus driver. That's what this whole debate in Washington right now is all about. Joining me now is E.J. Dionne, columnist for the Washington Post and an MSNBC contributor. E.J., thanks for your time tonight.
Good to be with you, Reverend.
What do you think when you compare Reagan in clips like that kind of talk we're hearing from John Boehner today?
You know, I do sometimes think that Ronald Reagan might well lose a Republican primary these days because he's too moderate. You know, somebody once said of Wagner's music that it's better than it sounds. And Reagan governed in a far more moderate way than he talked before he became a politician. And I think particularly in the last 4 years, something happened to conservatism and the Republican Party. My friends Tom Mann and Norm Ornstein got a lot of attention for their book, It's Even Worse Than It Looks, because they documented that the Republicans really have become more radical, more obstructionist, and more determined to roll back not only parts of the New Deal, but parts of the Great Society. Now, I don't think John Boehner himself is that far to the right, but he's got to worry about this caucus of his that I think does contain a lot of people who fit into that radical category, and it's created a real problem for our politics, particularly in the last 2 years.
And they also don't seem to really deal with facts, because when you really dig down into it, the average tax rates for incomes $50,000 to $75,000, taxes were actually higher under Reagan. In 2009, it was 27%. In 81 under Reagan, it was 31%. So they're really selling a myth. They've made Reagan this great hero, but when you actually watch, using your term, how Reagan governed, it is not exactly, well, it's not even near what they're advocating.
Right. Well, in fact, you wouldn't know it from the campaign commercials of the last campaign, but taxes have been lower under Barack Obama than they have been in years, not only because we kept the Bush tax cuts going, and I wish he hadn't made that earlier deal, but he did, but also because he gave a lot of tax cuts to people in the middle and at the bottom. And so the notion that we could govern ourselves at a time when the baby boom is starting to retire with that very low level of revenue just doesn't make any sense. If we kept revenue where it is, we'd have to slash those programs in a way that none of the public wants to do. And so all Obama's calling for is an increase on rates at the top. And I think the Republicans deep down know that that's where the people are, because they've at least given signals they're prepared to raise those taxes. They're just not ready to do it the cleanest way, which is to raise the top rates.
No, I think they know deep down within that it's ready, the public is ready to do it. I also suspect they know deep down that a lot of what they are selling doesn't really meet the facts. For example, when Eric Cantor was doing a 60-minute interview, 60 Minutes was exposing the GOP's denial of the real Reagan record. Well, watch what happens when the far right starts becoming confronted with facts. Look at this.
But you know, your idol, as I've read anyway, was Ronald Reagan. And he compromised.
He never compromised his principles.
Well, he raised taxes, and it was one of his principles not to raise taxes.
Well, he also cut taxes.
But he did compromise.
Well,
that's not true, and I don't want to let that stand.
And at that point, Cantor's press secretary interrupted, yelling from off camera that what I was saying wasn't true.
I mean, they're going to have to get real here, EJ. They're going to have to deal with some truths and some facts. Otherwise, we'll never make progress. We'll never move forward.
Well, I think there's a myth of Ronald Reagan as a pure ideologue, and then there's the reality of Ronald Reagan as somebody who governed. I mean, he's also the guy who recognized that Gorbachev was not like the old Soviet leaders, and that made a lot of conservatives uncomfortable, too. I think the Republicans have been taxophobic ever since George H.W. Bush had the courage to raise taxes in that budget deal back in 1990. He lost the election. A lot of Republicans voted against the tax increase, and they've been afraid to do it ever since.
E.J. Dionne, thanks so much for your time. Have a nice weekend.
And great to be with you. Thank you.